I'm Literary Freak 11. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in March. So I'm going to do the audiobooks first and then the physical books. The first book that I finished was The Iron Flower, which is the second book in the Black Witch Chronicles. And oh my gosh, do I need more of this? This book was so good. I've discussed the first book before. It's basically set in a magical setting and there's a lot of race, speciesist kind of relationships going on. And basically this girl who's grown up around her uncle ends up going to university. She's the granddaughter of the original Black Witch, Carnissa Gardner, who helped defeat the Celts who were oppressing the Gardnerians, which is like kind of their race, their mages, I guess. And they can do magic. And so now they've become the oppressors, and there's all this political intrigue, and there's all this depth, and there's also a race called the Amaz, and they are all women. Anyone from any race can join, and they basically hate men, and the main character questions that that's, you know, a bad way of looking at things as well. Like, any hate is a bad thing, and I really appreciated that aspect to it, and definitely recommend. 5 out of 5 stars. Can't wait for more to see how this series wraps up. The next book I listened to was Hidden Figures, and many of you have heard of this movie. This is about the black computers at NASA, and for those of you who don't know, before computers, they had to have people who physically computed things, and so the movie and the book are very different. I saw the movie first, obviously, and I thought the book was pretty good. I gave it 3 stars because it, wasn't chronological. It went into all the physics, which didn't interest me so much, but I guess would interest someone else. But on the other hand, it did cover a broader scope of people, and the movie kind of made it seem like these 3 figures were all the same, like all contemporaries, all about the same age, but really they weren't. Like, Dorothy was, I believe, Mary's boss for a while, and there's like a decent age gap there as well, and they didn't know each other for that long, and there were also so many more people that were discussed, like people who were just coming into NASA as like Dorothy, and the older generation was leaving, and so it really had a much broader scope and explained like the changes in NASA, what happened after the computers began, you know, losing their jobs, and where they went to other departments, and what black people really needed to do in order to have a place at NASA. It was a relatively progressive environment, so the interesting thing is, knew Catherine Goebel. I believe she lived in the same hometown, and so that was how the author got into this project. But it just read like a history book in a lot of places, whereas the movie told a more linear story, and so, shocker, but I think I like the movie better, actually, than the book. Yeah, there was just no artistry to the way that the story was told. Yeah, next book I listened to was Stardust by Neil Gaiman. Oh my goodness, this was so good. This was a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's a pretty short book too. It's about Dunstan, who goes into this fair that they have across the wall. The wall divides like Earth and Fairyland, and the town is literally called Wall. And basically this crack in the wall they can go through one day, every 9 years, I believe, and interact and buy things from the fairyland and sell things to the fairies and stuff like that, and that's kind of like the last commerce that they have. And so this guy Dunstan goes, he meets this woman who's slaved, and she has a baby. She ends up delivering to him, and this baby grows up, and because he's part from the fairy world, he ends up going back through the wall, even though it, like, never happens, and he goes on this epic adventure to find a star for this girl, and they see a shooting star, and he's like, if I find you that star, will you marry me? She was like, yeah, like, you're not gonna go find that star, BS, and then he does. And so this was also a movie, and I rewatched the movie, and some things that I liked about the book much better. In the book, at the end, spoilers, when he finally brings Victoria, the girl, this star, she is actually apologetic. She's like, I'm sorry that you went through all of this and that you know, we thought you died because you were gone for 6 months and we put you in danger. I'm really sorry and I don't want to marry you. And he was like, that's fine. That's chill. You know, because I fell in love with the star, who's actually a person. One thing I did like about the movie, the scene with the ship. Like, those characters are so much more fleshed out than in the book, and it was so good. It's like, they land on a cloud, the flying ship picks them up, and then it drops them off somewhere, and that's it, and you don't really get any more in the book. In the book, the witch who has imprisoned this woman is like, when 2 Mondays coincide, you'll be free. And she was just like, and so she does this whole thing. The reason that she has Tristan is to kind of help fulfill that, because there's a guy who's getting married whose last name is Monday, and he's getting married on a Monday. And so the 2 Mondays are coinciding, and there's like all this other workings that I would have to reread it. And she essentially tricks her way out of slavery versus Tristan kind of freeing her. Also, there's a whole plot about the princes of Stormhold want to find the star because she has the amulet that is essentially the key to the kingdom. So they're all looking for that, and so it's just really good. If you haven't read anything Neil Gaiman, I think it's a really good place to start, because it's not super weird like some of his other stuff, like Coraline is, and like American Gods, which is very niche humor, so definitely a good place to start. The next book I listened to was The Afterlife of Holly Chase, and this is a book about a girl who dies, and she becomes the ghost of Christmas past. And she essentially goes to people on Christmas Day. There's this company, they spend a whole entire year picking the Scrooge, preparing this person for the, picking the Scrooge, preparing what memories to show them that will help them reform. And she's a failed Scrooge. Like, she goes through this whole thing and then she just laughs it off, and the next day, and the whole thing is, the theme with Scrooges is they'll die within a year unless they reform. So they are trying really hard to save these people. And so she is a failed Scrooge, and that's how she becomes one. And it's a cute book. Like, I gave it 3.5 stars. It's definitely, I gave it, like, a whole star just for the concept, because it's good. You should probably read A Christmas Carol, which is heavily based on Before, if you haven't read it or haven't read it recently, because they stereotype each character in the person's life as one of the characters from the Christmas Carol. Like, they have a belle, like a lost love, and they fulfill these different roles. And if you don't remember these characters, they don't really explain it. So you kind of need to know who the characters are in relation to the Scrooge. The next book that I finished was Everless, and 4.5 out of 5 stars. I took a half a star off for the love, because she is still obsessed with the guy that she knew when she was 7, and only in books does that happen. Like, no, stop it. You haven't seen him in 10 years. There's no way she's still interested in him. This is a book that's based on time being a currency, so people who are poor essentially have to give tons of time to people who are rich, and there's all this lore about a sorceress and and an alchemist who are kind of playing this game of tag, and that lore ends up feeding really well into the main plot. And basically it's about this girl, and she ends up going to Everless, which is this estate of one of the 5 really wealthy families who's just like owns all the land, so they're mooching the time out of people in the surrounding lands. And so she ends up going there to serve and falls into all this political intrigue and drama, and I don't think that you should know really any more than that going into it. Last book I listened to, this was a big reading month for me with with 6 audiobooks, and the last book was Sandcastle Empire, and I gave this book 2.5 stars. It wasn't for me, but I did finish it, about a dystopian world where all of the people who have kind of been overlooked, like there's a lot of climate crises. Rich people get like these water bottles that like filter water, and the poor people get like 1 per 1,000 versus the rich people who every person gets 1. So like it's very, very different. And so the people who are struggling rise up, and so this takes place after the fact. The main character, Eden, escapes from this camp where the wolves, the people who have risen up, are keeping all of the people who are rich or privileged. She runs away, going to this island that her dad has left her a journal who's died and told her that it's sanctuary. And so she goes, but things on the island are really weird, like they struggle to survive, and they end up in all this political intrigue as well. There's another group of 3 boys who end up on the island, as well as her and her escapees, who are a group of 4 girls. And so it's a really interesting story. It was pretty dark, even though it has a happy ending. Also, I've decided to put my TBR for the month here and then take books off as I finish. Actually, I don't know why this is on here. I should take this off because I finished it. I still don't have American Gods to put here, so hopefully I'll get that back within the next week. The first physical book I read is Every Heart a Doorway. I've heard a lot of like people complaining about this book that were saying that they didn't really like it, but I gave it a 4 stars. I really, really loved it. I love that all of the characters were really well built. It is about a girl who shows up to this school for people who have been to other worlds and come back and miss their other worlds. And so it kind of teaches them how to adjust back into a normal life, and the whole point is that these kids are misunderstood, and so the world that finds them, the door that opens to them, is the door that understands them perfectly, and that is why they miss these worlds so much. And that doesn't always happen. There's another school for people whose worlds they like hated it, and essentially they have to recover from the trauma. And then as she comes, people start getting murdered, and of course everyone suspects it's her because she's the new girl. And she and this crew figure out like who's been doing the murders, and it's just like a really, really, really well put together book. The concept is really good, but I just like the way it ended, and I don't think I'll be continuing with the series. I think people have a lot of like mixed reactions to it, and the book is also funny and poignant. Spoilers here if you haven't read it, so just close your ears for the next 30 seconds, I guess. I really didn't like the fact that they're like, oh, it's so rare for people to go back through their doors. And then at the end, 3 people go back through their doors. It annoyed me. Other thing that I loved was that people who have doors, people who the world tells them they can come back, like, just the world keeps its promise. And I love that so much. Anyway, there were just so many good elements to this book, and I can go on discussing it forever. The next book I read was a novella called Into the Gray, and this book has not been published. And I am reading for a small, like, indie publishing group called Son of a Book. And so that is what that was from. And so you can't get your hands on it, so I'm not really going to talk about it. Next book I finished was Arch Enemies, and oh my gosh, this book. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm giving this book 2.5 stars, and yet I still have to read the next one. So, as Emma Books talked about, the one good thing in this book is that there's people get mental help for things. So if you don't know anything about this series, the first book is who has powers. There's the anarchists, and then there are the renegades, and the anarchists kind of overthrew like governments and stuff because people with superpowers were being treated badly, and the renegades kind of came through and tried to clean up the mess, but they've kind of become their own tyrants essentially, but it's just more low-key so people don't really notice. And so due to a certain level of tyranny, there's like a lot of mental health offered, which is a really interesting discussion. And basically this book, like this, oh my gosh, I didn't care about any of the friends. Like, they're in this team of 5. The main character, Nova, the main anarchist, who's really a libertarian, and I've discussed this before, like, what she believes in, what the anarchists believe in, are libertarian beliefs. She has pretended to be a renegade so she can infiltrate their headquarters, and so their team of 5, her, Adrian, the son, 2 of the head two of the head renegades, and so, well, adoptive son, because they're gay. Anyway, so them 2 are on a team with 3 other people that I could not care less about, 2 of which are in a romance. Anytime these characters are speaking, it is trivial, it does not move the plot along. They do not have personalities. In the first book, there was literally a, let's go in a circle and tell us our backstory, instead of, like, naturally revealing it in the way that, like, a normal conversation would, where, you know, someone says something, and then it springboards to another thing, then it, you know what I mean? It doesn't flow like a conversation, and I don't understand why Marissa Myers is so bad at writing these characters, but I hate them, and I will skip. And also, Adrian and Nova's romance, like, skip, but the concepts, they create an agent that will take people's powers away. And so the main character, Nova, is like, well, where do you draw the line? Do you take people's powers away who are evil, or who, like, really just don't align with your political ideology, basically? And it's the same thing with freedom of speech today. Where do you draw the line? You can't. There is no good line. And then in this book, they literally let people take this Agent N that will take away people's powers and use it at their own discretion without even a trial. They can use this. The next book I read was Deadbeat. This is the 7th book in the Dresden Files series, and oh my gosh, there's like a whole thing about necromancy in this book, and he resurrects a dinosaur named Sue, and it's beautiful, because, like, the rules are that, you know, you'll get kicked out of the council, and they'll probably kill you if you resurrect people, but never said anything about prehistoric beasts, and so that was pretty chill. And really, he just gets into all this, you know, dark stuff, and his body just takes so much damage. And I've heard that this author writes, what is the worst week this guy could have? And then just writes it, and that's the book. So these books take place every once a year. I loved the science behind wizardry. Like, they live about 300 years. So this one guy, Butters, is like, your cell, you see you fractured your hand there. This isn't, like, one of the few x-rays that works, because technology kind of becomes weird around wizards. There would be a scar from this fracture if this was a normal person. But no, there is nothing here. And that is, like, wizards healing themselves so completely in the way that a normal human's body would not. And that's why they live so long. The next book that I finished was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and I've been reading this off and on for a really long time. It's been pretty bad, and I finally finished it, and kind of on the same vein of Hidden Figures, but I like this so much better because there was a much more prominent human element, that it seemed to tell a story, and it was not necessarily linear, so it would flip from one to the other, to, like, the perspective of her and her life, her kids and her family after she died, and also what was happening to the cells. So there was, like, timelines over each chapter, so you knew what was happening when. And so the last part of the book is really, like, about her family, about trying to figure out what happened to her cells, what happened to the rest of her family. And so she really, like, did a lot of research. She became good friends with the family, and you see that relationship developed in the book. And so it's just so good. It's, like, I would probably give it, 3.5 to 4 stars. I don't really know, because, it's really not my genre of book. That's why I put the nonfiction books separately on my on my end of year list. It was an enjoyable read, especially as I got towards the end. I have the only physical book that I have because I accidentally gave away a couple of the books that I had that I was going to use for this video. Put them in a mini free library and went, oh wait, I was supposed to film this. Origin, I actually want to return this today. This was a 3-star book. Basically, this girl has been genetically created, through science, and she is immortal. She feels pain, but it's really, really hard for things to, penetrate her skin. She's not strong, and that was a good thing. She didn't become Superman just because she, was immortal. Her strength was something that she definitely lacked, and there were always times when she's like, oh, I wish I was stronger, then I could do this, but I can't, and so I'm glad that the author made her with this flaw. The other flaw that she has, which hella annoyed me, was that she is afraid of being swallowed by a snake. She can't die, but she's afraid of being trapped in a snake forever, and it's like she's surrounded by scientists. She learns tons of science. She does experiments with them. She should not be afraid of this because she should know that there are a bunch of possibilities. She would clog the snake's digestive system and it would die, basically, of complications, and then things would eat the snake, or she could just rip her way out. She could rip her way out anyway. That's a thing that mice do sometimes. Or nothing happens. She just gets pooped out. The point is, she would not be in the snake forever. And as someone who has grown up around science, she should know how irrational this fear is, or at least cite it in the book. Clearly, this author knows nothing about snakes. Anyway, so she's trapped in this compound, Little Cam, and she is trying to figure out the secret of her immortality. The scientists keep testing her. After you pass these tests, we will let you know the secret of your immortality. And she's like, okay. And so she keeps trying, but she's also been trapped in this compound for a really long time. And she essentially sneaks out, meets this native boy from this tribe a little bit farther out, and she learns a lot about the world, and they make her do questionably moral things in this book, like the science. They're in the middle of the Amazon. Why? Because they don't want government to interfere, to tell them the rules of experimentation. There are definitely some immoral experiments happening in this book. They need to be able to see how far she goes. I gave this book 3 stars. It was pretty average. Insta-love happens in this book. But the scientific concept is really interesting. This is a standalone. Next book that I finished was Ink, Iron, and Glass, and this is basically set in an alternate history, which, by the way, when you're about 150 pages in, you should definitely read the author's note in the back, because things will make more sense to you. I didn't read it to the end. They went, oh, because it takes place in 1891, and the whole struggle is for Italian unification. I googled it. Italian unification happened in 1871, 20 years before, and I was like, what? So it turns out that because one of the main character, Leo's grandfather, who was actually a real figure, died early, the author created this world based on if he died early before he helped unify Italy, what would happen. His son, in this book, ends up taking over the mantle. Place in this world, this girl lives in this human-created world called Veldana. Scribing books, scriptology is like the science, art, whatever you want to call it, of writing worlds. And so she lives in this scribed world. And her mom is kidnapped, and she has to come to Earth in order to find her. And she goes on this adventure. She meets these people called mad people. Madness is when you're obsessed with something. And there are only 3 fields of madness. And there's alchemy, which is kind of like chemistry and healing. And then there's mechanics, which is, engineering. So you could be a mechanist, an alchemist, or a scriptologist, which is writing these worlds, basically. And those are the 3 forms of madness. And she can do all 3, which means she has an inclination towards all three, where most people have one, which means she's incredibly powerful and people want her, and she just goes on this adventure. And it's really interesting how they use their powers to get around problems. I would give this book a 4 stars. It was a pretty solid read, and I enjoyed it. The last book I finished probably like 2 hours after midnight on April 1st, but it's going on this list anyway, was Monsters series, Volume 1, Issue 1, Purity, and it switches perspectives, and it's about the after effects of this disease that essentially mutates people, and it becomes very painful for people. Sometimes they go mad, sometimes they kill themselves, and they're just, they could grow scales, they could grow, their genetics just get totally messed up. And so it's kind of switches perspectives. You get Chloe's perspective, who is a 17-year-old girl. I wouldn't say this is adult or YA. It's actually like everything, because there are a lot of characters of a lot of different dispositions. There's also disappearances going on, and that's why Chloe's worried, because she's in the age bracket for girls who are disappearing. And then there's also a police officer investigating the disappearances. And then there's Chloe, who, there's something weird about her. She has like increased hearing, but she doesn't really know what that means. SID, which is the name of the disease, and they never tell you what the acronym is, infected people. And so the world is essentially based on trying to get rid of these diseases, and making sure that early warning signs happen, that the family's quarantined, that it doesn't spread. So the Purity is a company that is essentially trying to make that happen, and there are just so many elements to the world. This is a 5-star read, and you can get the whole volume, which is 6 individual books, for $5 on Kindle. I kind of want a physical copy, because now that I know that I'm invested, but the physical copy is like $30, I'm like, maybe not. Obviously, I'm not going to pick any of these back up until after the readathon, because not on my TBR. So that's essentially what I want to do. But yeah, the way you think that there are a lot of perspectives is a lot, and if you're worried, there's probably only 1 or 2 other characters to each perspective, and they're not main characters. So it's also really good because one character can build the universe in a completely different way from another character, and something will happen, and you'll be like, I don't quite get it, and then you'll read the next part, and then it'll be explained immediately. So there's not like this ton of forced mystery where the questions are kind of piling up, like things get answered very immediately, which is why it's such a good book. This is by Stephen Turnbull, and I had a really hard time finding this on Amazon, actually, and it was recommended to me by a friend, so I'm actually going to put the link to this in the description so that you can find it much more easily than I did. I'm going to link the whole series to you, but once you find the author's name, you can click on him and look up the first individual book, which is what I read, which is actually free, or was free, at least when I bought it. Anyway, this has been a long video because I read a lot. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully the next one will be shorter because I'll have discussed them in my vlogs. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I put out new videos every Tuesday, and I'm going to be doing the readathon vlogs. So thanks for watching.